Hello everyone, my name is Christina Cleveland and I'm part of the team at Canadian Management Centre and want to welcome you to our webinar, Critical Thinking, an Essential Leadership Skill. We're excited to have over 1,000 people joining us today on this webinar. I am the Senior Director of Talent Development Solutions at Canadian Management Centre, and joining me today is one of our esteemed faculty members, Candida Fridman. Hello, Candida.
Hi there.
Great. So we are excited to talk to you about this very meaty topic of critical thinking. But before we get started, I do want to take a minute to welcome those of you back who are returning as part of our webinar series. And for those of you who, if it's your first time joining Canadian Management Centre, we'd just like to give you a little bit of background information about who we are and also to set the stage for today's topic and what we'll be focusing on for the next hour. So in terms of who Canadian Management Centre is, for those of you, as I said, who are new to us, we're a national organization committed to preparing the next generation of leaders for tomorrow's marketplace. We are part of the AMA Global Knowledge Network, which is one of the largest networks in the world. And on an annual basis, we train over 15,000 people in key topic areas ranging from communications to management and leadership to project management, and sales and marketing, so several different topics that are available. But management and leadership tends to be one of the most popular areas where we focus in partnership with our clients. So we do have the privilege of serving a number of organizations across the country, ranging from various sectors and industries, both within programs that we offer in terms of open enrollment sessions, live online virtual classroom sessions, but also customized learning solutions where we have the ability to partner with our clients to deliver our programs in your organization. And critical thinking is one of those areas. During today's session, we will be live on Twitter, and you can join us in the conversation. By 2:30 p.m. Eastern time today, you can tweet with us and use the hashtag CMCEvents. Anybody who does participate with us online will be entered for a chance to win a prize pack, which will include this new book published by Amacom, which is the Critical Thinking Toolkit by Dr. Marlene Caroselli, which is an exciting book that actually has a number of different hands-on activities to get people thinking better and faster and applying some of the skills that we'll be talking about today. So again, you can join us in the Twitter conversation by using the events hashtag CMCEvents to be entered for your chance to win. After the session today, you will receive an email with a link to a recording of the webinar, so you'll have access to review this and also to share it with your colleagues if you so choose. And we will be trying to create an interactive session today, so there'll be some opportunities for us to get feedback from you by participating in online polls and also through the live chat panel to submit your questions as well as comments. So Candida and I will both be exchanging with you and then drawing your attention to those opportunities. But we will start off with why this topic today. The topics that we choose for our webinar series generally come from feedback that we receive from our participants, but of course we like to apply well-documented research to the topics that we're selecting to ensure that they are relevant to the needs of our participants. So given that there's over 1,000 of you online with us today, we can be assured that we definitely have chosen a topic that is of interest. But critical thinking is recognized as a key leadership skill. And we know, based on rapid change in our workplace today, it's definitely a skill that employers are looking for, that leaders are trying to develop, and we're searching for within our employees. But the good news is that critical thinking is a skill that can be learned, and we're going to start to skim the surface today on the topic, and Candida will apply some of her experience in delivering our critical thinking program to hundreds of participants to share with you some of the best practices that you can apply back on the job. To support the well-documented component of the research that's been initiated on critical thinking and why it's an important skill, in 2010, our affiliate, American Management Association, conducted a study evaluating critical skills needed to succeed in the workplace within the next 5 years. So in the survey, they partnered with an organization called P21, which is a US-based organization that advocates for 21st century skills and readiness for students. So they're actually connecting the academic system into the workplace and trying to identify what are the skills that are going to be required for employees now and into the future. And based on this research, they surveyed over 2,000 executives and managers about something they call the 4 C's. So 4 critical competencies, which are critical thinking, communication, collaboration, and creativity. And they asked these executives and managers to rate the importance of these skills to their organization today and into the future. And the results clearly indicate the importance of these skills, reinforcing that several executives as well as managers in the workplace today, and based in 2010, so looking from 2010 for the next 5 years, were indicated that critical thinking is definitely a key component and a skill that needs to be developed. And more details about this research is going to be made available to you in a post email that we'll send to all participants who are on the webinar participating with us today. But you can see the connection between critical thinking, communication, collaboration, and creativity. But of these four, when it comes to the skills and the importance that they play in the workplace, there's a clear indication that these skills and competencies will become even more important as we move forward in the future. So there's definitely feedback from our clients at CMC that indicate that there is a perception that critical thinking is not a competency that can be easily developed. It seems to be, a fairly ambiguous topic. All individuals have their own preferences and tendencies in terms of how we approach situations. So we're here to tell you today that critical thinking is a skill that can actually be learned. So that's what Canada will be reviewing with us today shortly. But as it relates to developing the competency of critical thinking, success in developing this competency comes from our attitude, practical instruction, and practice. It definitely takes practice, and I think Canada may poke fun at my skills as it relates to critical thinking, and I'll be the perfect poster child for the fact that critical thinking can be a learned skill. And that practice comes from transferring the skills learned in new situations. So we're hoping by the end of this webinar today that you will actually have some practical insights about what you can do differently to apply critical thinking in your day-to-day work. So I am going to transition the mic over to Canada shortly. Again, I just want to remind everyone that we are going to be trying to create an interactive session for you today, so we welcome your participation. The chat panel that's located on the right-hand side of your screen will allow you to submit any questions to us that we will try to address throughout the session, and also we've left some time at the end. And we'll also be asking for you to comment using that chat panel as well. So again, that's in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. And we will be opening some polls as well for you to participate in, and those will also open up on the right-hand side of your screen. So to introduce you to Canada, Canada started her career as a barrister and solicitor specializing in employment law in Ontario. So talk about critical thinking at work. She has lived and worked internationally and delivered training in over 25 countries and worked in over 25 countries. And she specializes now in management and leadership development, as well as within strategic management within her own practice. So she works as a consultant as well as a facilitator. And we're thrilled to have her as part of our facilitation team at Canadian Management Centre, where we choose to engage facilitators who bring practical real-world experiences to the classroom so that they can relate to some of the challenges that our clients are facing back on the job. And we'll no doubt be able to benefit from Canada's experience today. So without further ado, I'll pass it over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Christina. And again, as Christina said, the important thing here is for this to be as interactive as possible. So what I'd like to start with is giving you a little bit of the agenda for today, what we're going to be covering. We're going to first be looking at what is critical thinking, and then what does critical thinking mean for leaders, and then how can you actually apply critical thinking. And I'll take you through a process called the Agile Critical Thinking Process. And at the end of that, you'll realize and you'll learn that there are 10 critical thinking skills. And by the end of this, you'll have some ideas on what exactly critical thinking is and how practically you can learn and use the skills from that. So first of all, let me start with a definition of critical thinking. So let me read you one that is on your screens now. Critical thinking is the intellectually disciplined process of actively and skillfully conceptualizing, applying, analyzing, synthesizing, and/or evaluating information gathered from or generated by observation, experience, reflection, reasoning, or communication as a guide to belief and action. So you all got that? Everybody now understands critical thinking, I'm pretty sure, right? Probably not. So let me break that down a little bit, because I have to say, every time I say I'm doing a course on critical thinking or I'm writing a paper on critical thinking, everybody says, what actually is critical thinking? And if I use that definition, I think I'd lose everybody who is ever thinking they understood what critical thinking was. So let me break that down a little bit. Critical thinking really is an objective way of thinking. It's thinking objectively. It's the practice of using a number of different advanced thinking skills to solve problems, find solutions, guide our actions. So it really is putting every skill that you have of thinking into play. So when you think about advanced thinking skills, that's really the conceptualizing, the applying, the analyzing, all of those factors. And the point that I want to raise when we look at that is that these are skills that you can actually learn. So we think about when we were at school, we learned those. Let me just start with a little bit of an example, how we use critical thinking in our everyday life. So as you can see on the screen, there's a coffee, which brings to mind many things to many people. So let's say you're at work and you're thinking, I'm ready for a coffee break. What goes through your mind? So Christina, what goes through your mind? What do you think about where you're going to go for that coffee, what you're going to do?
I'm relatively brand loyal, and I won't mention the brand on this particular webinar, but I will generally think about, because there's several locations that are around our building, so I may think about how much time I have, so which location I know I can go to. So I'll look at the clock and see what time of day it is, too, to know how busy one location may be. And my order's pretty standard, so.
Never deviating from that. That's what I'm going to have, however I feel.
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay.
My fuel.
Okay. So again, so without even realizing it, you're kind of going through a little bit of critical thinking of, where am I going to go? Is it a sunny day? Should I go outside? I might go to the same brand, but there are many locations. Am I going to walk outside? Am I going to go underground? How long do I actually have for that? Maybe, and I know, Christina, I'm looking at your face and you're going, I'm not going to change, but maybe that day you might have a tea instead, you know, something like that.
Change it up a bit.
Maybe I'm really thirsty, I want something else as well, or something with that coffee. But all of these thoughts go through our mind without realizing it. So we are all critically thinking. Of course, there are other factors that go into play as you do it, but, you know, we make certain assumptions of, that's got to be the best coffee where I'm going to. We look at all the information to figure out how we're going to evaluate what we're going to do, the weather outside, how much time we have, those factors. And from all of this, we come up with a conclusion. That's where I'm going to go for my coffee today. So the key that comes from that is critical thinking can be done in just a few minutes, a few seconds, or depending on the size of the problem or what you have to deal with, it can take a little bit longer. So as you see, we all have it in us. We all do critical thinking. So let's go a little further here. And as Christina mentioned, the 4 C's that, of critical thinking, communication, collaboration, and creativity are very important to leaders, to executives, to managers all over. And as you can see, an American Management Association survey showed over 2,000 executives and managers identified critical thinking as the most important skill, by a very large margin, too. It's the most important skill. So I'm imagining out there you're thinking, really? Are you sure about that? Well, let me tell you why. Critical thinking can improve results, productivity, capability, profitability. It all works towards the ROI. It's very important that it's rated so highly because it's a key skill to improve your bottom line. It can improve it how? It enables a broader understanding of the business by thinking objectively on that side, allows for faster and more effective problem solving. I know that decision-making and problem solving is a big issue in business today. And if you're critically thinking properly, you're much more able to effectively problem solve, create better communication and collaboration, and it enhances all the different types of ways you can think, including creativity, more innovation. All of these factors lead to improvements in the profitability of organizations, creates efficiencies, and it creates more effective negotiations, and as I say, it can improve your bottom line. critical thinking is for leaders. It's for everybody moving up in an organization. You use critical thinking in many different ways, from how you deal with change, how you manage change, how you're resolving conflict with individuals, managing performance, looking at the resources, how are we going to allocate all the resources. So in everything that you're doing, it's very important to effectively apply critical thinking skills to improve things as you go through the business today. There is a process to critical thinking, and the process involves you've got to assess a situation, and we will be going into this in a lot more detail, just showing you how these skills can work. But it's important to assess what actually is the situation. You have to define where you are and assess that, and then critically think about, what's really going on. Have I really got a good grasp of the situation itself? Do I understand it? What is really going on? And after you've looked at that, then using this process, you're able to act. You're either able to solve the problem, come up with a decision-making plan, or at least a plan of attacking the situation in a positive and objective manner. So I think Christina has an idea here about putting a poll together.
Yeah, well, we wanted to get some feedback from the audience on your thoughts in terms of what critical thinking actually involves. So on the right-hand side of your screen, we are going to open up a poll question, just asking you to reflect on the question that is on your screen. Critical thinking involves each of the following, except A, arguments, B, assumptions, C, emotions, or D, conclusions. So take a minute and just submit your responses online. I'm just reading off what the options are, because I understand there are some people who may be having some difficulty viewing the slides. So again, the poll is critical thinking involves each of the following except A, arguments, B, assumptions, C, emotions, or D, conclusions. So we'll just give it a couple minutes to get the responses going, and then we'll see what participants are thinking. But I know for me personally, there's a lot of, there should be option E, which would give us more than one to choose from. So we're just clearing out the results, and they should be displaying on your screen. So they'll populate very shortly. I'm getting the indicators that they're coming up. So, Candida, I guess in terms of some of the conversations that you have with attendees and participants, you'll hear that a lot of these things can factor into the critical thinking process.
Absolutely.
And it looks like the results of the audience seem to believe that the answer is C, emotions, so 54% of our group.
Yeah, we've got a 54% to say emotions, and I think that those people are going to happily find out that that is the correct answer. It is C, emotions. And so I want to go a little further about thinking about that. At the beginning of this talk, I mentioned how critical thinking was an objective way of looking at the situation and thinking about it. The word objective means you've got to do that without all those emotions, without the judgments, without those ideas. So Christina, how do you find that? Are you able to get rid of all your emotions when you start to think about solutions, solving problems? Does that ever enter into your situation?
I would like to say that I'm a very objective and clear-minded thinker, and I have people in my life who might disagree.
So are you critically thinking about that? Are you very objective with that?
How does that relate to analyzing myself?
So the point is our emotions can bring up such a lot on the way that we decide to do things and we problem solve. Here's a very simple example. When I first met Christina and I heard the name Christina, I was reminded of somebody I went to school with at a very young age, Christina, who wasn't very nice to me. So what do you think happened when I first met Christina? Did I give her a fair shake? Was I really friendly right at the beginning?
Certainly hope so.
Of course I was.
You worked through it, Canada.
I work on critical thinking, so I was able to think, oh yes, Christina, this, I have to look objectively. Who is this person? Let me evaluate it. Let me lose all of those assumptions, that judgment that I have, and think about that in a very logical and objective fashion. So I was able to do that. But when you look out there, and I think I'm sure I hate to say this, but when you all heard my name, Candida, I'm sure that some of you were singing that song, which I often get, which I won't even mention on that side, but there were memories, depending on your age out there, but you could have been thinking of Tony Orlando and Dawn, or you could have been thinking, what's a name like Candida? Where does that come from, right? So we all have our little burdens with names and factors like that, and think about for yourselves, what are the things that affect your what are the things that affect your problem-solving ability, your decision-making? So keep that in mind, and the whole thing about learning the critical thinking skills is that you are able to get rid of the emotions and really think about the assumptions and come up with a very clear conclusion that you can work on, evaluating things properly. So let's look at the concept and framework that we use when doing the course on critical thinking here at Canadian Management Centre. And that concept and framework is called Agile Critical Thinking. So let me take you through that a little bit here. And the idea of Agile Critical Thinking is to first, as I mentioned earlier, assess the situation. So assess that with losing all emotions, judgments, that side of it. And before you take action, looking at the different areas. So understanding that you need to recognize, I do have assumptions. Just as I did in that example with Christina, I recognized that name meant something to me. So I got to recognize that's there, and how do I deal with that? And I've got to evaluate the arguments in a situation, which helps to draw the conclusions in an appropriate and an objective manner. The other side to that is if anybody ever asked you, why did you take that action, you're able to come back to them and say, after critically thinking it through and be able to take them through the steps, they realized that what you came up with was an objective solution to a situation. So you've looked at that. We've got recognize assumptions, evaluate arguments, and draw conclusions, all part of the Agile critical thinking concept and framework.
As we're talking about the actual model, Candida, I know we're going to go into more detail, but we've got some chatter happening from participants in terms of connecting emotions within the critical thinking process, and some people asking about the role of emotional intelligence when you're coming into these situations and having to think about the sort of emotions and perspective of others when you're coming into making a decision. Where does that fall?
That's a great question. And emotional intelligence is, exactly as it says, it's an intelligent way of looking at your emotions. So emotional intelligence really relates to the fact that you need to be self-aware of understanding your situation and who you are, and then understanding other people. So it's actually an objective way at looking at emotions by being intelligent with your emotions, which is right in the flow of critical thinking. It fits right in there. Using emotional intelligence can help you be better at critical thinking. Thank you.
Great.
Yeah. So great question, and keep them coming out there. Okay. What I'd like to do is take you through an example which I think most people can relate to. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a picture on the screen now. And what would be useful for us is for you to put any comments in chat on this is what brings to mind when you see these pictures. And you can see on your screen you've got pictures of all sorts of dwellings there, all sorts of variety. And the example that we're going to be talking about is about buying a house or a condo or a townhouse or an apartment, whatever it means to you, but you can see there's a variety there. So what comes into your mind? Let's say all of a sudden you realize, I've got to buy a property. I've got to buy a dwelling. So Christina, I know we've had chats about this in the past. What do you think about it? Does it make you happy thinking about that? What goes through your mind if I said to you, I'm thinking of buying a property?
So I guess if I were attached, I know we're going back to emotions, but if I were to attach an emotion to it, for me it's frustration, perhaps because the last process was not as fun as other individuals have experienced with a new home purchase. So it's the idea of the excitement that usually comes along with it. It's got other people coming in that they start thinking about the nice-to-haves versus the must-to-haves. They start thinking about money, finances. They start thinking about decorating. They're thinking that they're anxious, so a lot of different things.
It's a lot of things, because for somebody they could think, oh my gosh, that's fantastic, what a great opportunity. I remember when I bought my first property, it was such a fun experience. it depends what happened during that experience. Just as you're saying, it's the frustration of having to look at places, what do I really want? And there are so many elements that it can be overwhelming. So what happens with people, they go, you know what, I'm not going to buy anything, too hard. That's where they go, and they don't even think, they don't even evaluate anything. Others, automatically, I'm going to buy the first place I see because I don't have time for this. And other people are thinking, gee, what do I really want? I've got to narrow this down. And we all know what it's like when you're trying to buy something, is everyone has an opinion, don't they? Everybody's going to say, this is what I did, and you know what, I'm right. We're all right about that. So have there been any, what do you think out there about buying property? Have there been thoughts of what people have said on buying their first property or looking at those pictures?
Yeah, so that it's stressful, time-consuming, making the right choice, looking at stability, people considering options, regs to riches was a suggestion as well.
Interesting.
Costs came up. As well as something else that they're thinking about. So
that's in there.
Location.
I like it.
Freedom, old versus new.
Yeah. So it's interesting is some people see the word freedom and others see it as frustration on that side. So it's amazing when you think all you have to do is show a picture or just say something in a room to people, I'm thinking of buying this, and everybody can relate to that in some way. So what I'd like to do is explain the process that I talked about, the critical thinking process, and bring it to your minds from buying a house, give you some examples. So narrowing down what we talked about earlier with the Agile Critical Thinking concept and framework, we looked at 3 areas, which was recognize assumptions, evaluate arguments, and draw conclusions. And as you can see, easy to remember with the word red. So right from now, you've already got some key insight into critical thinking if you just remember the words red. So let's look at that in a little more detail. So you've got recognize assumptions, and this is, as I said, this is a process that we look at in the course on critical thinking here at CMC. And in each of those areas, it's broken down into different skill sets that are going to be able to help you to recognize the assumptions, evaluate, and then draw conclusions in an objective manner. So if you look at recognize assumptions, we'll go a little further on this one. There are 3 skills that are very helpful to improve your critical thinking. Distinguish fact from opinion, consider relevance, and seek alternative viewpoints. So let's go back to that lovely example, and I know Christina is already kind of looking frustrated with this, so the emotions are coming there, but we know how to bring that back in. As you mentioned earlier, Christina, that you're able to be very objective and analyze these things, right?
Well, I try to be, and I'm lucky to be surrounded by people who can help me with that.
Fabulous. Well, I've seen that you're very capable of doing this, so let's look at what happens when, in the first one, looking at the housing example of buying a property, distinguish fact from opinion. So when you're buying something, what happens? As I said earlier, everyone has their opinion. Everybody thinks, well, you got to buy a condo because that's the way of the future, or you got to get a house because this is what happened to me when I had a condo, or this is what happened with a house. This is the most important thing. You got to buy in this area. So all of these opinions come out. So the point is, how do you distinguish fact from opinion? Some points to that is you got to point to specific, credible information. And when you think about credible information, there's got to be a little bit more than just, I know, Christina, your aunt was very good at buying her house. What does she know about it? Is that credible or is it not? We've got to look a little bit deeper when we go there and substantiate why something is true or can logically be concluded based on the data that's given. So there's got to be a bit more substantiated fact rather than just an opinion. That's the number 1 point that we go into a lot more detail on for recognize this assumption. And then consider the relevance. Rather than just accept the assumptions on face value, question whether they make sense based on the situation. For example, if you're from a small town and somebody says to you, you've got to get a house with a lot of land, that's very important, they're probably thinking that's because you're going to be able to build back there. You might have a lot of livestock. You might have, for sure, you're going to have lots of cats and dogs and maybe even a horse there. And you're thinking, I'm thinking of buying in Toronto. That's slightly different. In a big city, is it relevant to you what they found useful about buying a house? So you've got to keep in mind the relevance of a situation and the information that comes to lose and recognize that those are assumptions. The other side to recognizing assumptions is to be able to seek alternative viewpoints. Explore other people's assumptions and perspectives of the same situation. When you talk about creativity and innovation, one of the keys is being able to look at a situation and from another perspective or another lens. This is what we're looking at here. Rather than just, so if you want to buy a certain thing, when we're looking at the property example, it's best that you don't pick everybody who's exactly like you, because then you're going to get exactly the same viewpoint, and everybody's going to agree with you, and everybody's going to say this is the way to go. What you want to make sure you're doing is looking at a number of different people. Some people might have more real estate experience. Other people might have owned houses or condos for years. So important when you're looking at is to consider all the different viewpoints that you have. So when you were looking at buying property, did you go through the looked at the assumptions there? Or were there any assumptions that you made?
Yeah, well, and absolutely, we were moving into a new neighborhood, so completely new for both of us. So there's definitely these steps are taken into consideration, but I can see the applicability. Outside of just buying a house in the workplace, there's real applicability to these steps that we're moving through in terms of recognizing assumptions and the connection it makes back to critical thinking, that we do these things every day, and we just may not realize that we are, in fact, actually thinking critically during the process.
Absolutely. It's important, and this goes back to the question that we had earlier about emotional intelligence. Part of that is also to realize, what are the assumptions that I'm already making? From my emotions, we all make assumptions on things. So once you can recognize those, you're past the first step of being able to think in a more critical way and be able to get past your assumptions and move on to the second stage, which is to evaluate arguments. So again, going back to the example of buying a property, is everybody, as I said earlier, everybody has an opinion on that. Oh my gosh, it's the most amazing thing. You want to bring that into a room, everybody will say, this is the way to do it, this is what you have to do. There's a lot of arguments, for and against, pro, con, everything that you do. So the three skills that we look at in more detail here are, the first one, to be aware of persuasion techniques. So I'm gonna just throw out there is, has anybody ever come across a pushy salesperson when they're trying to buy property? I'm guessing maybe one or two of you out there have had that situation. I've been through that myself, where you go and you talk to them, and oh my gosh, everywhere they say it's perfect for you.
Yeah.
And
There's got people commenting yes with like lots of punctuation.
So I've hit a mark there, have I? So everybody, but they have their own agenda, don't they? And they can have the most incredible persuasion techniques. In fact, as Christina mentioned, I come from a law background, so I was taught the persuasion techniques on that side of it. So I know what I'm looking at when I hear that, and I'm thinking, which school did you go to? I know what you're talking about. So you've got to be aware of persuasion techniques. It's the most awful thing when you're in a room and you see somebody selling to someone else, and you're thinking, oh, come on, you've got to be aware that there's something going on there. So again, you've got to be cautious of people that are selling their idea, their recommendations, what's in it for them, what the benefits to them. They're great at doing that. So we teach you on the course ways to be aware of these persuasion techniques. Second one is about recognizing bias. You got to pay close attention to be sure you don't see something that's not there. Again, if we use the example of property, there's an emotional bias that comes in is, I just love that place because there's a balcony there, and I just love balconies. I love the idea of standing on that balcony, looking out, waving at everybody. Oh, I might be getting a bit too personal there. Yeah, okay. So that's just a bias somebody has if they want to show a little bit of attention on that side of it. Or there could be the most amazing washer and dryer in there, and you so love washing and drying clothes. I'm just throwing it out there. There could be someone like that. And you've got to recognize the bias. Am I being biased? Am I choosing something not based on critical thinking, but just based on my natural bias towards, I want to be in that neighborhood, or I want to be close to that shop, that's my favorite shop. So again, you got to avoid having that bias, and then you've got to check strong emotions. And again, going back to that emotion, and I was happy to see on that evaluation that so many people understood that you've got to have that emotional intelligence. You've got to be aware of your emotions. We have strong emotions. And if you look at evaluating arguments as a whole, the people that are very good with the persuasion techniques tend to be able to watch their, shall I call it prey, or shall I just call it their customer, and they're able to say, oh, look at their face when they walked into that room. They've lit, there's been a light on their face. They're emotionally attached to this. I can sell this. I can persuade them into it. So again, I say when you go into a shop and you really want to buy something, salespeople can see, I've got some, that you really want that. So they know you're in there to buy, and they also know the people that don't have any strong emotions when they do that.
Well, that persuasion, those persuasion techniques exist in the workplace too, where you get, roped into something that you've agreed to because you don't want to say no. So we have a great question from one of our participants, which is, do you have any suggestions on ways to actually put a stop to the persuasion tactics? Like, how do you get yourself through that so that you can continue to move through the process?
Great question, and I think the first part of that is you got to be aware that that somebody's trying to persuade you to begin with. So using the critical thinking model on this way is you become much more aware that somebody is actually trying to persuade me. And you have to be aware of what you really want, and you have to keep going back to, this is what I'm here to do. Do not be swayed by this person. They're saying this, but be very objective with the way that you approach every situation. I know it's easier said, but as Christina mentioned earlier, and I will keep repeating, these are learned skills. The more you practice, the better you will become at them.
Okay, great.
Thank you. So let's go a little bit further. And the third area that we look at is you've got to be able to draw conclusions. So you've got to be able to weigh the data carefully, looking at all data in a way that makes sense. So what are your priorities, for example? You've got to assign appropriate weight to the information. So if cost, which came up earlier for buying a property, is your biggest issue or your biggest area, then you've got to weigh that more. You've got to weigh the data and think, okay, I love this place, I'm emotionally attached to it, but it's way above the cost that I wanted. So you've got to weigh that. And then use multiple sources. So again, when you're drawing conclusions, look at all the information that you've been given. And from that, expand, question the data, look at other sources, make sure, again, looking at the property example, that you've looked at the newspapers, you've talked to other people in that neighborhood, you might have talked to other salespeople on it. You've looked in a very clear and concise way before you are able to draw that conclusion. Another aspect we look at is ask others to critique, and this I think is a very useful technique because it's kind of asking other people to play the devil's advocate role and say, what would you do in this situation? I'd like you to challenge my conclusions. I've come up with this. Do you see anything else? Now, interestingly, this came up in a course that I recently taught about looking at how you deal with other people, how you deal with your boss or somebody who is a colleague who comes up and says, this is just the way I'm going to do it. And the suggestion is you've just got to play it back and say, I just need to challenge. This is the conclusion that I've come up with. What am I going to do? What would you suggest? Is this the way you look at it? So in other words, the important part is be objective about the conclusions that you make, and you can actually do that for other people to help them be better critical thinkers as well. The other area here, the skill set, is a diagram for understanding. Like a picture is worth 1,000 words. I know some of you out there probably use pie charts to how you deal with things. You can use bar graphs. You can look at things if you actually draw a flow chart on how you're going to go through it. So instead of just talking to people, just using your verbal linguistic intelligence or just going through the step process of these skills, you can also use your visual spatial intelligence to be able to look at a situation in another way. It's another way to look at your perspective. And if you actually draw it out, if you drew a picture of that house that you were thinking of buying and you thought, how much room do I really have? Will my furniture actually fit in there? You might actually find, even though you love it and you've gone through this process, you might have to draw a different conclusion.
So when we think about drawing conclusions in the workplace, Canada, and the idea of like weighing data carefully, and we've got comments coming in from some of our attendees about how do you avoid analysis paralysis where you've got so much information.
Great point.
And even asking others to critique, how do you make that a collaborative process as opposed to, people maybe not investing the time with you or not telling you, giving you real honest feedback about what their perspective is because they feel that you want to hear a certain thing.
Great point. Again, you've got to make sure that you're very objective about the people whose opinions you ask. Because, again, do you want to ask a bunch of people that will agree with you, that are afraid to fight with you, or afraid to challenge you? And then you're thinking inside, I actually just want to buy that, or I want to have that answer, and you're not critically thinking. You're not being objective. So you need to make sure that you write down and think, whose perspectives would be useful, who will challenge me? So that's part of the question you asked. And the other side of it is that lovely phrase, analysis by paralysis. Yes. And it's true. And as some of you out there who are very analytical will think, there's never enough data that I can weigh carefully. There's so much information. There are so many sources. Again, if you are one of those people that likes to analyze everything like that, and I have to say, I have a background that involves math and statistics, so I raise my hand. I'm one of you out there. I had to be very objective and think, how much information do I really need? What are my most important criteria? And then I had to give myself a time limit to think, okay, when is enough information? Because you know what? There's always more information you can get out there. You've got to just focus on your top priorities in order to analyze it in the most effective way.
Well, I like that you're setting parameters, for yourself, but I wonder in terms of asking for others to critique, that if you're going out to people who you want to get a different perspective from, that you objectively think about that as you described, but also you set some parameters for them, that you invite them to really poke holes in your thinking, challenge your assumptions, challenge your thinking so that people feel comfortable to do that and that the trust exists so that you can have that kind of conversation.
Absolutely. As you said, you've got to have the trust, and they've got to feel they can challenge you. Because, again, you could go in there and say, I really want you to challenge me, but your face and your tone is really saying, but don't you dare. So you've got to pick people, and you've got to let them know that it's open to do that.
And then, I guess, enter in that emotional intelligence piece that we talked about earlier. Right?
Exactly. Spot on, Christina. So that's given you a little bit of an example of going through the 10 critical thinking skills that we go into more detail about. And I think we're going to look a little bit further now.
Yeah, so we're going to open up another poll and invite some more participation. So opening up again on the right-hand side of your screen, the question is, in your work, which of these areas, either recognize assumptions, evaluate arguments, or draw conclusions, is the most difficult for you? So as you are selecting your selection in the poll, you can also give us your feedback on why. So why is that particular area the most challenging for you? And we've had a lot of great discussion coming in from our attendees. So while the poll is being completed and the responses are coming in, we had one question which I think is very relevant in terms of, when it comes to critical thinking, where does gut instinct and intuition come into play? And, is there any room in the process for your intuition?
That's a question that comes up quite a bit because somebody says, well, what about my gut instinct because I need to be very creative and innovative, and critical thinking is going to stop me from being that way? Absolutely not. I still firmly believe that having a gut instinct is a good thing. But if you really think about it, those people who have that gut instinct and start to be a little creative, they've already thought things out a little bit. They've probably gone through the critical thinking module to a certain extent about how they deal with situations. So I think it's important to have that gut instinct, but then to be able to objectively say, was that just an emotional gut instinct? Be able to back it up. Because remember, somebody's going to say to you, why did you come up with that? In the workplace, somebody always asks that question. So if you can back it up with a bit of these areas, then you know that your gut is spot on in that way. So it gives you just that peace of mind that you've got it right. And the other part of the question about where does innovation come into play, creativity and innovation are a crucial part of critical thinking. And in fact, that's part of the process, the learning process of critical thinking, because you're able to evaluate so many more areas, and you can be a lot more creative and innovative in those areas if you use this process.
So I guess I want to come back to that intuition piece that it's involved in the process, but it shouldn't rule the process.
Absolutely.
You're thinking critically and you're thinking objectively.
Absolutely, because it is important to, when you get to a stage where you really are working through the process of critical thinking, it's using all of your brain, your left and right brain, your logic, your creativity, everything is involved in the process.
Well, and it looks like our poll results are in, so we've got a good split within the audience of challenges where they're experiencing. So highest area is recognize assumptions. That was mine also. Evaluating arguments and also drawing conclusions, kind of ranking within that order. Some of the comments coming in from our participants is that, for them, evaluating arguments or drawing conclusions may be difficult because they get stuck. So that idea of the analysis by paralysis piece still definitely comes in. The assumptions factor is that there may be hidden assumptions either for ourselves or about others. And then evaluating arguments is the most difficult because the information that you can deduce is only going to be based on the great information that you have coming in. So that's right. Garbage in, garbage out type of process. You've got to pay attention to the data.
Absolutely, and I agree. In that poll, my area I find toughest on is about recognizing the assumptions as well, because we all like to think that we're not judgmental. We all like to think that we're very objective, but if we all stop for a minute, we all have our own bias and our assumptions that we come in with. So it's very important to be able to recognize those. So thank you all for responding to that. It's very useful to get all that information and see how everybody sees things. What I'd like to point out to you as well is when you talked about that, when you take the course on critical thinking, there's actually a report that you can get, an appraisal on critical thinking called Watson-Glaser. And what I want to point out is you can't do this, it's not available for individuals, it's only available through a class and through a specific person who is designated to do the Watson-Glaser appraisals. And the key to this is it actually goes through the R, the E, and the D. And it breaks it down into those 10 areas, the 10 different skills that you have, and gives you what is your strongest, what are the areas that are your biggest challenges. So it would be very interesting, those people that responded to that poll, if you had the opportunity to do the critical thinking appraisal and to see, was I right on that? Did I actually see? And what's great about this report is it gives you those areas, and then it gives you some ideas, some actions on how you can get through those and how you can improve them. Yeah. So I just want to review very briefly on that is the areas that we cover here at Canadian Management Centre on learning critical thinking skills. And as I said, the recognized assumptions, there are 3 skills that we go into a lot more detail. And it would answer, as Christina has given me so many of your comments and questions on that, is they draw attention to these areas in much more detail of what is it that affects you in your critical thinking process. So there's 10 skills in all, and we've given you a brief understanding of them using our example, but I'm sure every single person there could think of ways in their life that each of these areas of skills affects. The important thing that I want you all to remember from this, the takeaway, is that critical thinking really can be learned. It's not something that some people are just born with, they're much better at it, is the more you practice, as with any skill, the better you're going to become at it. And if you have the right tools and techniques, you're much more likely to be able to improve and have great success from critical thinking. It's hard to grasp at first, and we all have our issues and our emotions or analysis by paralysis, all the things that came up there. These are things you can overcome, and success comes through having the right attitude, realizing this is something that I want to improve, the practical instruction, the practice of all of these skills, transferring the skills to situations, and really reflecting and thinking about the process itself. So what I'd like to do is just leave you with one key takeaway from this. And when you're getting emotional in a situation, when you've got a bias, when your judgment's kind of taking over, think red. Think R-E-D. think about recognizing assumptions, evaluating the arguments, and drawing conclusions, and what you can do about that. So remember that phrase, think red.
And so we are going to take a minute to open up the chat panel again to invite your questions and any comments that you have, so on the right-hand side of your screen. We just have a question sort of coming in about what I would describe as courage in the process of critical thinking, that, as you're going through and moving through the red process and you're getting input from others, that you may be in a situation where you have to get feedback from people who are more senior than you, or you may have to push back on decisions that they may be making based on your own critical thinking process. So can you help us understand where courage needs to fit in to the critical thinking process when you're dealing with individuals who may be in a more senior position to you?
Absolutely, and they're looking to you in a way. It's very important as you're moving up, and there are people who are going to be dealing with at a higher level. It's very important to be able to realize that your job is to think critically, even if it's somebody who's in a higher position than you. Because guess what happens if you don't? They come back and say, in fact, this came in a class that I taught the other day where somebody, senior, came up with a really bad decision, and nobody did anything about it. And afterwards, they were all blamed. Well, you should have stopped me from doing it. You should have challenged me. So it's important to have that courage to be able to get past that, because it is your stepping stone. It's the skill, as we mentioned earlier, that makes you a leader, that makes you a better leader, that makes you the most effective leader that you can be.
Definitely, and I think that idea of coming back and asking others to critique, that applies to leaders, to go out to your team, to get feedback from them, to challenge your thinking, poke holes through your assumptions as well, which may have you kind of go through the process again, right?
Absolutely. Great leaders ask those questions. They don't just come up with the answers, they ask, and the effective ones, they've already asked and polled people around them.
And so we put up the red model review slide based on requests from individuals asking to be able to see those steps mapped out again. But I think, we sort of talked about critical thinking doesn't have to be a long, drawn-out process. And I wonder, we tend to avoid the idea of critical thinking because it seems like a lot of work. We're thinking about our own thinking, right, which just sounds so complex.
Yeah.
And kind of coming back to the initial definition that you put up, it seems like it's very complex. But one of our participants commented that, it sounds a lot like nursing. If you're you're a healthcare practitioner, or you may be in an emergency situation where you've got to make quick decisions. Critical thinking comes into play.
There's a checklist for you. It's, have I done this? And so it's a great way to make sure that you've made the right decision. If you just look at the 10 skills there and you think, have I made sure I've recognized assumptions? And you're 3 there. Have I evaluated all the arguments? Check. And then am I able to draw the conclusion? Have I done that properly? It kind of gives you peace of mind. You did all you could.
Yeah. Well, we've got a question that will kind of blend pop culture and critical thinking Canada. So we've got a question to find out about who you could provide as an example, or someone who's a role model in the public eye. It could be, TV or a live figure that is a good critical thinker.
That's a good question, and it's a great idea to actually think about role models or people that we can look to do that. I'm sure there's some of you out there that watch Dragon's Den. Dragon's Den is a great example of critical thinking, because you have 4 people there who have different perspectives. The panel who looked at their businesses, and they have different ways to look at it. So right away they're able to evaluate arguments. They're always chatting with each other or challenging each other to make sure that these assumptions aren't met, that they recognize that there are assumptions so they can play off each other that way. And weighing all the information, they're able to draw conclusions and come up with the right conclusion on whether they're going to give money for a project or not for a business. So it's an example that if you watch that, and you could actually go through your 10 skills and check off as they're doing each one of them. And if you think all of them are leaders in their own right, so it shows the effective critical thinking in process right there.
Well, I'm going to be doing that this evening. I do believe Dragon's Den is on tonight. But I guess another question that was coming in is the difference between critical thinking and problem solving or decision making. Is there a difference? Are these 2 skills distinct?
As I mentioned earlier, and it's again, decision making is a component of critical thinking. You're not really able to problem solve or make a good decision or make an effective decision unless you've gone through the critical thinking process. So if you go through this, in the D section of the 10 skills, you're drawing conclusions. You're actually problem solving, and you are able to come up with the right decision. So it's all part of the process of critical thinking.
And what about translating it from the classroom? So the idea that you learn these skills. So we've talked about RED today, we've talked about these particular competencies, and we've got some questions around how do you actually apply it in the workplace?
Again, practical examples. You apply it, we talked about from getting a cup of coffee to everything that you're doing. Every time a decision comes up or something that you have to do in solving, if you just, again, use this as a checklist to go through the R, the E, and the D, you can apply it to all of the situations that arise in the workplace. Everything ranging, as we said, to managing conflict, because again, conflict is one of those where our emotions get into play. I don't really like that person, or they're a troublemaker. And if you can step back and say, that's my assumption, what is the real situation here? You can apply it to that, to a negotiation you're going through, all the way up to your hiring or your recruiting, all factors in the business.
So it's quite possible it becomes a very unconscious activity for you, right?
Absolutely. The more you practice this, the more we do it. As said at the beginning of this talk, we do it in our everyday life without even realizing it. So don't be afraid of it. It really is natural, and the tools and techniques will just help you do it just that little bit better.
Right. And so we've got one final question that we'll have time for today, which is how can management or a leadership team provide an environment that fosters critical thinking and encourages employees to shift their paradigms?
Again, this is something that we're moving into. I've noticed this with a lot of businesses that I work with, that people are saying, you know what, we really need to make sure we have critical thinking in this organization. So what they're doing is they're having open forums, opportunities for everybody in the business from all levels to ask the questions. They make sure that they feel safe with asking those questions, and they make sure they create an environment where they can be challenged. As you said earlier, Christina, one of the questions, managing upward, they give people the courage that it's okay to ask those questions. So just allowing a freer environment for questioning and being objective would be great.
Yeah. So, and I mean, they've got to model the skills and then create the environment.
Absolutely.
Right. So if you're interested in learning more about critical thinking, Canada does deliver our critical thinking program, and we've got the upcoming dates of this session posted on your screens right now. We did have a question about whether or not CMC provides access to the Watson-Glaser assessment, and that is actually part of our critical thinking program. So that is an opportunity and an assessment that you can complete if you were to participate in this particular course. So, Canada, thank you so much for bringing us your knowledge and expertise today on this topic. It seems like a big topic, but we appreciate you simplifying it and also showing us how it can easily connect into our everyday lives.
Great. Thanks for having me.
So it's quite possible I've been thinking critically all day long.
Absolutely.
So just a reminder, we do have a Twitter contest ongoing today up until 2:30 p.m. Eastern Time, so you can tweet about today's webinar using our events hashtag CMC events. And again, you'll be entered in for a prize pack to receive a copy of the Critical Thinking Toolkit. So if any of you who are participating are leaders, again, there's some really practical ideas and activities on what you can do to facilitate creative thinking, or critical thinking, and creative thinking within your team, because we've learned today the two are well connected. Yep. So we will look forward to your feedback. Again, the topics that we select definitely are driven by the comments that we receive from attendees. So once you close out your window today, you will be prompted with the survey so that you can give us your suggestions and also your feedback on today's session. So we definitely look forward to hearing from you later on. We did cover off our Q&A, but we will also summarize some of the questions and answers that were initiated during the webinar. We'll send those through to you in our post-email follow-up, which you'll be receiving also a copy of the recording, which will give you a visual of the slides that are available. So you can visit us at www.cmcoutperform.com to find out more about the Critical Thinking course and also any of our other upcoming free events that we have available. But we thank you so much for taking the time to join us today, and we'll look forward to seeing you again.